What if I told you that everything you were taught about the dawn of human civilization is wrong? The neat timeline you learned in school, the one that begins in an orderly fashion about 6,000 years ago, with the first cities and the invention of writing in Mesopotamia, is perhaps just the final chapter of a much older, stranger, and more epic story. What if I told you that even before human history began, this planet was ruled by just 8 kings, and their reigns lasted not for a few decades or a few centuries, but for 241,200 years? This isn't a fantasy novel. It is written in one of the oldest texts ever discovered, an ancient Sumerian document that records the name of every single one of these near-immortal kings. We are talking about kings who held the throne for 28,000 years, and 36,000 years at a time. They watched empires rise and fall under their command, moving capitals across a prehistoric world we cannot recognize, until it all came crashing down in a single cataclysmic event, the Great Flood. The story we all know as the beginning might actually be the end of their world. The proof for this incredible claim isn't hidden in some secret vault. It has been sitting in a museum for a century, etched onto a small, unassuming prism of baked clay. This artifact, no larger than a modern paperback, systematically shatters our entire understanding of history. It is called the Weld-Blundell Prism, and it contains a document known as the Sumerian King List. It doesn't just suggest our history is older than we think. It states, coldly, clearly, and factually, that before a global flood, just 8 kings ruled humanity for that staggering 241,200 years. Its story begins in 1922. On the sun-scorched plains of modern-day Iraq, a British archaeological expedition led by Herbert Weld-Blundell was excavating the ruins of the ancient Sumerian city of Larsa. Amidst the rubble and millennia of dust, they found it, a 4-sided clay prism covered from top to bottom in cuneiform, the exquisite cuneiform script of the Sumerians. When it was finally translated, scholars were completely bewildered. They were expecting another record of grain harvests, trade transactions, or temple hymns. Instead, they found a meticulously organized list of rulers, their capital cities, and the lengths of their reigns. The style was not poetic or mythological. It was written with the dry, dispassionate precision of an accountant or a court scribe. It read like a ledger, a factual record, but the facts it recorded were impossible. The list begins with a simple but world-altering statement. After kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. The first king of Eridu, it says, was named Alulim. He ruled for 28,800 years. The second king, Alalgar, ruled for 36,000 years. The third king, Enmanluana, held the throne for 43,200 years. The list continues through 8 kings in 5 different cities, each reign lasting tens of thousands of years. The scribe then neatly totals the sum. 8 kings. Their reigns combined are 241,200 years. And then the list stops, abruptly, chillingly, with a single, stark sentence. Then the flood swept over. To the modern mind, these numbers are absurd. No human being can live 28,000 years, let alone rule for that long. The immediate reaction from mainstream historians was to dismiss this entire section as pure fantasy, a creation myth no different than tales of giants or dragons. They labeled these original rulers as mythological figures and their reigns as symbolic. It was a neat and tidy explanation that allowed history to begin safely after the flood. But the prism held a secret, a detail that makes this easy dismissal impossible. Because after the line about the flood, after the world was supposedly submerged, the list picks right back up again, and that's when the real bombshell drops. After declaring that the flood had swept over, wiping out the world of the 8 kings, the prism doesn't end. The story doesn't stop. Almost without a pause, the scribe continues. The list begins anew. After the flood swept over, the text reads, and kingship once again descended from heaven. The kingship was in Kish. It begins listing new kings, new cities, and new reigns. But now, something has fundamentally changed. The numbers are no longer in the tens of thousands of years. They become plausible. The first post-flood kings still rule for extraordinarily long periods, several hundred years, then over a century. But as the list continues, the reigns get shorter and shorter, a few decades, 23 years, 9 years. Suddenly these numbers don't look like cosmic myths anymore. They start to look like history. And that is when, buried deep in the list of post-flood kings, we find a name that shakes the foundations of archaeology, a name we know very well from other texts. The list records Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. Gilgamesh, the hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the world's oldest works of literature. A warrior king whose great city walls at Uruk have been physically excavated by archaeologists. Gilgamesh is not some fantasy god. He is widely accepted as a real, historical figure, a flesh and blood king who ruled Mesopotamia. And the Weld-Blundell Prism, the same document that talks about 36,000-year reigns, lists him as a historical fact. This creates an inescapable paradox. If the post-flood section of the Sumerian King List is accepted as a genuine historical record because it contains real figures like Gilgamesh, how can we so confidently dismiss the first part? The same scribe, using the same factual, dispassionate tone, wrote both. The document makes no distinction between the mythical kings who ruled for 43,000 years and the historical kings who ruled for 43. It presents them all as part of a single, continuous history, interrupted only by one great flood. To ignore the first half is to tear a document in two and declare only the piece we like is authentic. This forces us to ask a terrifying question. What if the list isn't myth? What if it's a memory? A distorted memory, perhaps, but a real memory of an impossible past. The mystery deepens when you look at the numbers themselves. The impossibly long reigns are not just random, exaggerated figures plucked from thin air. They follow a precise mathematical pattern. The Sumerians did not use our base 10 decimal system. They were masters of a base 60 sexagesimal system, a legacy we still use to this day to measure time, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and to measure space with 360 degrees in a circle. Their highest unit of cosmic time was called a SAR, representing 3,600 years. Now, look at those prehistoric reigns again through this mathematical lens. Alulim's reign of 28,800 years, that is exactly 8 Saudi riyals. Alalgar's reign of 36,000 years, exactly 10 Saudi riyals. And Manluana's reign of 43,200 years, exactly 12 Saudi riyals. This is not the work of a storyteller making up big numbers. This is a calculated, deliberate, and ordered system. The scribes were recording something they believed to be accurate, but accurate to what? This leads us to two stunning possibilities. First, the numbers are symbolic, representing eras of influence or cosmic cycles. But if so, why present them as the reigns of specific named individuals? Why say Alulim ruled instead of the age of Alulim lasted? The second possibility is far more radical. What if these rulers were not human as we know them? The list itself gives us a clue in the very first line, the one that started it all. After kingship descended from heaven. To the Sumerians, rulership was not a human invention. It was not something we developed. It was a gift, an institution delivered to Earth from an external source. This has led some researchers to a controversial, almost unthinkable conclusion: that the Sumerian King List is a record of a time when Earth was administered by non-human entities, beings whose biology, or perhaps technology, allowed for lifespans that make ours look ridiculous. And in the background of this theory looms a single powerful name from the ancient Sumerian texts: the Anunnaki, a term often translated as those who from heaven to earth came. The Weld-Blundell prism is not a standalone fantasy. At least 16 other fragments of the King List have been found all across Mesopotamia, in cities like Nippur and Kish, all telling the same core story. It was a foundational, accepted history by the very people who invented civilization. They believed without question that their world was born from an age of godlike kings, an age that ended in a world-destroying flood. This clay prism, therefore, doesn't just ask us to reconsider our timeline of history. It forces us to question the very nature of our past and the identity of the first to ever sit on the throne of planet Earth. It presents a history split into two distinct acts: the world before the water and the world after. And to understand any of this, our journey must begin in that lost antediluvian world, as we explore the true meaning behind that first fateful descent of kingship from the heavens. That phrase, kingship descended from heaven, is not just an ancient poetic flourish. It is a complete reframing, a fundamental inversion of the story of human civilization. Our modern understanding, built over centuries of archaeology and anthropology, tells a story of gradual evolution, a bottom-up story. We picture small bands of hunter-gatherers slowly settling down, learning to farm, forming villages. And over thousands of years, these villages grow into towns, and towns into the first cities. In this model, government and kingship are a natural invention, a necessary tool created by humans to manage increasingly complex problems like irrigation, food storage, and defense. It is a human solution to human problems. The Sumerian King List throws this entire model into the fire. It presents a radical alternative, a top-down origin. It claims that civilization did not painstakingly invent kingship. Rather, the institution of kingship arrived first, fully formed, like a package delivered from an outside source. Civilization then crystallized around this pre-existing structure. Think about what this implies. It suggests human society did not develop its own operating system through trial and error. An operating system was installed. This concept fundamentally changes the role of those first rulers. They weren't just the strongest warlords or the cleverest priests who seized power. They were appointees, the first CEOs of a cosmic franchise established on Earth. Their authority didn't come from the consent of the governed or the strength of an army. It came from a higher, otherworldly power. This is the essence of what we call the divine right of kings, the belief that a monarch is subject to no earthly authority, deriving the right to rule directly from the will of God. We tend to think of this as a later invention, a justification for power used by European kings in the Middle Ages. But the Sumerians are telling us it was there from the very beginning. The very first king who ever ruled did so because he was chosen by the gods. The stage for this monumental event was a city called Eridu. To the Sumerians, Eridu wasn't just a city, it was the first city, the primordial home. Archaeological excavations confirm Eridu as one of the oldest settlements in Mesopotamia, with foundations dating back to around 5,400 BC. But what they found there is strange. Deep beneath the sands, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a small temple. Over the centuries, this temple was obsessively rebuilt over and over again. 18 times. Each new temple was larger and more elaborate than the last, but all were built directly on top of the old one's foundation. It was as if the inhabitants were trying to maintain a sacred connection to that exact spot on Earth, a point of contact. Sumerian myth tells us exactly why. Eridu was the home of Enki, the god of wisdom, knowledge, magic, and creation. Enki was often depicted as the friend of mankind, the great scientist and engineer of the gods. If kingship, with all its associated laws, sciences, and social structures, was a gift, Enki's city would be the logical delivery point. This brings us to the most provocative interpretation of descended from heaven. What if the Sumerians meant it literally? What if the Anunnaki, the gods they said came from the sky, were not mythological figures, but tangible beings? Beings with advanced technology and a sophisticated understanding of social engineering. This hypothesis, though radical, offers a surprisingly neat explanation for one of archaeology's greatest puzzles: the Sumerian problem. Civilization seems to explode from nowhere in southern Mesopotamia. Complex writing, advanced mathematics, including the base 60 system we still use, stunningly accurate astronomical knowledge, and monumental architecture all appear in a remarkably short period of time, with little primitive precedent. It's as if a switch was flipped. The conventional theory of slow, gradual development struggles to explain this sudden leap, but a theory of external intervention, of knowledge given rather than learned, explains it perfectly. The idea of a divine mandate for rulers is not unique to Sumer. It is a foundational belief for nearly every great ancient civilization, a strange echo across cultures separated by vast distances and thousands of years. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was not just a king. He was a living god, the earthly incarnation of the god Horus. In China, emperors ruled by the mandate of heaven. Across the world, from the Inca emperors claiming descent from the sun god Inti to the Japanese emperors tracing their lineage to the sun goddess Amaterasu, the story is the same. True power flows from the sky, not from the earth. Could this universal myth be a distorted, shared memory of a single event? A memory of a time when humanity's path was deliberately and directly altered by a non-human intelligence. The Sumerian King List doesn't just suggest this. It presents it as the opening fact of its historical record. It states unequivocally that our story did not begin with a human idea. It began with a divine directive. We are left to grapple with a choice between two realities. Either kingship descended from heaven is the most successful piece of political propaganda ever invented, or it is the literal truth, a 4,000-year-old memory of the moment our world was changed forever by contact. And the prism gives us our first clue by naming the very first king to hold this divine mandate in the sacred city of Eridu, a ruler named Alulim. Alulim, the first king of Eridu. His name is forever etched as the first on the list, the first recipient of divine kingship. The prism tells us he ruled for 28,800 years. Try to visualize this, not as a symbolic number, but as a reality. Imagine a single consciousness holding power as the last ice age was at its peak, and still being there as it ended. A king who watched the ice caps melt and the sea levels rise by hundreds of feet during his reign. To the Sumerians, Eridu was the home of the gods on earth. Under Alulim's rule, and then that of his successor, Alalgar, who reigned for 36,000 years, Eridu was the capital of the planet for 64,800 years, a span of time more than 10 times longer than our entire recorded history. But the kingship did not stay in Eridu. The text states clearly, with the practical tone of a ledger transfer, "Then Eridu fell, and the kingship was taken to Bad Tibira." What does "fell" mean here? Was it a war? A natural disaster? Or simply an administrative decision? The text doesn't say. It just records the transfer. The next 3 kings ruled from Bad Tabira, fortress of the Smiths, for a combined 108,000 years. Then the kingship moved again, to Larak, then to Sippar, the bird city, and finally to Shuruppak. In total, 8 kings, 5 cities, and 241,200 years of a single managed world order. This is not the history of competing nation-states. It reads like the history of administrative centers. If we accept the radical hypothesis, this is the history of the first Anunnaki governors. They weren't building empires to conquer each other. They were managing a project. Project Earth. They were the shepherds, and nascent humanity was their flock. They brought law, science, astronomy, not for our benefit, but for the benefit of order. They taught us how to build cities, not so we could be free, but so we could be organized and efficiently managed. Imagine a world without human war as we know it, because humans were not yet in charge. A world run with a cold, near-mechanical, divine efficiency. A tightly monitored golden age stretching across cosmic cycles that we, with our short lives, can only measure by the slow crawl of the stars. All this time, humanity existed. We were the craftsmen, the servants, the laborers in this grand project. We lived and died in the shadow of immortal kings whose nature and purpose were as alien to us as the night sky. And then it ended. After the 8th king, Ubaratutu of Shuruppak, completed his 18,600-year reign, the Sumerian scribe wrote the fateful line, the one that split history in 2. Then the flood swept over. No explanation, no theological reason given in this particular list. Just a cold fact, an end event, a hard reset. 241,200 years of divine order, erased. The entire project, submerged. From that water, our civilization emerged. Kingship once again descended from heaven, but it was changed. The new kings were human, or at least far more mortal. Their lifespans were brief. Gilgamesh, the great historical king, reigned for 126 years, an insignificant blink compared to the 36,000 years of Alalgar. The Weld-Blundell prism is not just a list of kings, it is an indictment of our amnesia. It suggests that our entire 6,000 years of recorded history is just a difficult, desperate rebuilding process on the ruins of a far greater world. We are not the first, we are merely the survivors. This leaves us with one final, unsettling question. Did the Great Flood not only wipe out their world, but also our memory of it? And in those 241,000 lost years, what other secrets of our true origins still lie buried beneath the waters of time? In the midst of the dawn of history, even before writing was invented to record the names of the gods, there was a city, a place considered primordial, sacred, the intersection point between heaven and earth. That was Eridu. Here, amidst the fertile marshes of southern Mesopotamia, an ancient text, the Sumerian King List, tells us a momentous event took place. The gift of kingship was bestowed from heaven. And the first recipient, the first king of humankind, was a figure named Alulim. With this act, with this unrecorded coronation, the great clock of human civilization began to tick its first beats. The King List describes this event with a naked brevity. It doesn't tell of his coronation. No epics of great battles, no hymns praising his unparalleled wisdom. It simply states his name, his city, and a number that challenges all human experience, a number that stretches our perception of reality. Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Let that number sink in. This is not just a long reign. It is an expanse of time so vast it could contain the entirety of humanity's recorded history, from the first stones of the pyramids being laid to the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope 3 times over. To our modern sensibilities, this number is the ultimate proof that Alulim is just a myth, an impossible figure, a product of prehistoric imagination, but to the Sumerians, that very number was proof of his legitimacy. It was the seal of his divinity. 28,800 was not a random number. It is exactly 8 Saudi riyals, 8 perfect cycles of 3,600 years each. It was a number of cosmic significance, signaling a reign in absolute harmony with the order of the heavens. To even try to comprehend this, we must detach from our own sense of time. Imagine a king who did not age as we do, a ruler who was a constant presence, an unmoving constant. Tens, then hundreds, then thousands of generations of his subjects were born, lived their short lives, and died, while he remained. To the people of Eridu, Alulim would not have been a man. He would have been a geological feature, as permanent as the Euphrates River, and as immortal as the daily sunrise. This absolute stability would have cemented the idea of kingship as a divine, unshakable institution. How could anyone question a system whose leader had presided over their civilization since time immemorial? His very existence was the ultimate proof that the power he held was not of this world. And this is where the Anunnaki theory provides a fascinating, if not disturbing, framework. What if Alulim was not a human king, but an Anunnaki governor, an extraterrestrial entity assigned to oversee? Or perhaps a genetically modified human Anunnaki hybrid with an unnaturally extended lifespan? From that non-human perspective, a 28,800-year reign suddenly shifts from a mythological impossibility to a simple statement of fact. After Alulim's epic reign ended, the King List tells us the kingship remained in Eridu. The throne passed to a second ruler, Alalgar, and his reign, if possible, was even longer. 36,000 years, a perfect 10 Saudi riyals. The pattern continues. Alalgar, like Alulim, is a ghost in the historical record. No stories of his deeds remain, only his name and his impossible number. His reign reinforces the theme of cosmic order and stability. He is remembered not for changing the world, but for maintaining it. For 36 millennia, he was the anchor, the great shepherd keeping the human flock on course. Together, these first 2 kings ruled from Eridu for a total of 64,800 years. For comparison, the last ice age only ended about 11,700 years ago. Human agriculture was just beginning then. According to this document, the city of Eridu was a stable, continuously ruled political entity for an unimaginably long period of time. This forces us to look again at Eridu. Was it just a collection of mud brick huts, or was it something more? As archaeologists dug deeper through the layers of time, they found that the city's central temple, rebuilt many times, contained unusual artifacts. In the deepest, oldest layers, they found a massive quantity of fish bones, piled up as if in offering. This aligns perfectly with Sumerian mythology. The myths say Eridu was the home of Enki, the god of wisdom, magic, and the fresh waters, a god often depicted as rising from the Abzu, the watery abyss, and whose sacred symbol was a fish. The myths even tell of strange beings, the Apkallu, 7 demigod sages sent by Enki before the flood to bestow culture and the civilized arts upon mankind. They were described as being adorned with the bodies of fish. Could Alulim and Alalgar have been these Apkallu? Enlightened teachers from another realm? Let's try a hypothesis. What if Eridu wasn't just the first city? What if it was the first Earth base, a colonial outpost established by the Anunnaki? Its location on the edge of the Persian Gulf would have been ideal. Access to water, resources, and a location from which to expand. The impossibly long reigns of its first two kings would then represent the initial stabilization phase of this off-world project, a time of direct supervision before the operation expanded. In this view, Eridu was the original Garden of Eden, not a garden, but a controlled environment, a city-state where the great experiment of human civilization began, under the watchful eyes of its non-human creators. And then, after 64,800 years of uninterrupted stability, the King List declares something shocking. Eridu was abandoned and its kingship was taken to Bad Tabira. This was not the fall of a city. It reads like a planned, strategic relocation. The headquarters had moved. Why? The name of the new capital, Bad Tabira, gives us a chilling clue. It means Wall of the Coppersmiths, or Fortress of the Metalworkers. The focus of the entire pre-flood project was about to change. It was moving from the watery realm of Enki and the establishment of civilization to something more industrial, more tangible. The age of philosophy and law was over, and the age of the forge was about to begin. When the kingship was relocated from the sacred city of Eridu, it wasn't just a change of address. It was a change in mission. The new capital, Bad Tabira, Fortress of the Metalworkers, signaled a shift from the quiet establishment of civilization to a new fiery era of industry and transformation. This is where the great project, if we dare call it the Anunnaki project, began to accelerate. The first king to rule from this industrial hub was Enmanluana. His reign, according to the Prism, lasted 43,200 years. This number, again, is incredibly specific and deeply meaningful. It is exactly 12 Saudi riyals. In Sumerian cosmology, and indeed in many ancient traditions, the number 12 represents completion and cosmic order. 12 months in a year, 12 signs of the zodiac. His reign was not just long, it symbolized a perfect, complete cycle of heavenly and earthly power. But the power in Bad Tabira was tangible. It glowed in the heat of the furnaces and echoed with the sound of hammers. To the ancients, metallurgy wasn't just a craft. It was a form of magic, a sacred art. To take dull, inert stone from the earth and through fire and secret knowledge, transform it into shining, indestructible metal. That was to imitate the gods themselves. It was the ultimate act of creation. And Bad Tabira was its global center. Under Enmanluana, humanity was not just being ruled, it was being taught to master the physical world. This aligns with chilling precision to the core thesis of researchers like Zecharia Sitchin. He argued that the Anunnaki came to Earth for one primary reason, to mine its precious metals, specifically gold, which they needed to repair the failing atmosphere of their home planet, Nibiru. In this scenario, Bad Tabira wasn't just a capital city. It was a massive industrial refinery. Enmanluana was not a human king. He was the Anunnaki foreman, overseeing a planet-scale mining and processing operation for over 43 millennia. After Enmanluana's great 12-Sar cycle was complete, the kingship remained in the City of Forges. It passed to a ruler named Enmengalana. His reign is listed as 28,800 years, or 8 SAR. This number immediately stands out. It is the exact same duration as Alulim, the very first king in Eridu. This repetition is deliberate. It signals that after an age of intense industrial development, it was time for a new beginning, a phase of consolidation and implementation of a different kind of technology, social technology. While Enmanluana mastered the material, Enmangalana's role was to master the social. His legacy is tied to one of the most fascinating and mysterious concepts in Sumerian thought, the sacred me. The me were a set of divine decrees, cosmic laws, often described as physical objects, perhaps tablets or data crystals, that contained the blueprints for every single aspect of a high civilization. There were me for kingship, for priesthood, justice, writing, music, weaving, mathematics, even for complex concepts like truth and deceit. They were the divine software for civilization. Sumerian myth states the me were owned by the god Enki in Eridu, and Mengalana's reign suggests a period where these foundational principles were disseminated and encoded into the social fabric from the new capital of Bad Tabira. He was the guardian of the cosmic rules, the king who ensured that new industrial power was balanced by divine order. From an Anunnaki perspective, the me could be seen as a literal database, a complete instruction set for building a controlled, functional society, handed to a chosen administrator to ensure the human workforce remained organized and productive. After these 2 long, stable reigns dedicated to industry and order, the story takes a sharp and deeply human turn. The final king to rule from Bad Tabira was Dumuzid, whose reign is listed as 36,000 years, or 10 Sar. But unlike the quiet, administrative figures before him, Dumuzid leaps off the clay prism and straight into the heart of mythology. He is remembered not just as a king, but as Dumuzid the Shepherd. More importantly, he is the central figure in one of history's most enduring and influential stories, the myth of the dying and resurrecting god. The story, told in passionate poems and laments, is a cosmic tragedy. Dumuzid was the lover of the powerful goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar. When Inanna descended to the underworld and was trapped there, a substitute had to be found for her release. Demonic figures came for Dumuzid. Despite his attempts to hide, he was captured and dragged down to the land of the dead. His death plunged the world into grief and infertility. Inanna, consumed by sorrow, eventually arranged for him to return to the world of the living for half the year. His annual death marked the coming of the dry summer, and his return in the spring brought fertility and new life. Dumuzid is the archetype. He is the original blueprint for Osiris in Egypt, for Tammuz in Babylon, Adonis in Greece, and Mithras in Rome. This story of a divine figure who dies and is reborn, whose fate is tied to the salvation and renewal of the world, became a foundational pillar of religion. Even the central story of Christianity, of a divine shepherd who sacrifices himself and rises again, echoes the tale of Dumuzid, first told millennia prior. This poses an incredible riddle. How did a king from the pre-flood list, one who supposedly reigned for 36,000 years, become the subject of such a personal and emotional myth? Was he an impossibly ancient ruler whose tragic death was later mythologized into a story about the seasons? Or was he always a mythological figure, a personification of the agricultural cycle, who was later inserted into the king list to give himself a historical pedigree? For the Sumerian scribes, they saw no contradiction. To them, he was both a historical king from an ancient age and a god whose passion played out in the heavens and in the earth each year. With the end of his reign, the era of Bad Tabira, the city of fire, law, and passion, came to a close. The king list declared that the kingship would move once more, this time to a mysterious city named Larak, a place that, unlike Eridu or Bad Tabira, has never been found. After the fiery industrial age of Bad Tabira, the transfer of kingship marks another mysterious shift in the pre-flood narrative. The new capital was Larak. Unlike Eridu, which has been located, or Bad Tabira, which can be linked to known sites, Larak is a city that exists only as a name on the clay prism. Despite extensive archaeological surveys in Iraq, no ruins of Larak have ever been definitively identified. It is a ghost city, a capital of a forgotten kingdom that left no physical trace. This has led to endless speculation. Was Larak completely obliterated from the face of the earth by the coming flood? Or was its name an alternate, a code name for a location whose true nature was kept secret? Perhaps an isolated command center, a scientific outpost, or a sacred place of judgment. The only king to rule from this lost city was Ensipatzadana. His reign is recorded as 28,800 years. This number again rings like a cosmic bell. A perfect 8 Saudi riyals, the exact same reign length as Alulim, the first king, and Enmengalana, the lawgiver king. This repetition is a clear signal. After the dramatic and emotional age of Dumuzid, this was a reign of balance, of order, of cosmic stability, a return to foundational principles. While the King List is silent on his deeds, later Sumerian texts connect the city of Larak with the god Ninurta, a powerful warrior god, but also the god of agriculture and healing. He was the divine enforcer who brought both destructive floods and life-giving irrigation. This duality suggests Larak's purpose. Ensipatzadana's long reign may have been about maintaining the delicate balance of the planetary systems. He was the king not just of law and order for society, but for nature itself. In the Anunnaki framework, this represents a period of planetary management. After millennia of intensive mining and industrial activity in Bad Tabira, perhaps a long period of stabilization and ecological control was needed. Ensipatzadana's reign, from his hidden capital, may have been that of a divine environmental manager, managing the climate, water resources, and agriculture, sustaining the human population for nearly 30 millennia. When his reign concluded, the kingship moved to its fourth capital. This time, a city we have found, Sippar. Sippar was famous throughout the ancient world. It was the great cult center of the sun god, Utu, later known as Shamash in Babylonian. Utu was not just the fiery orb in the sky. He was the supreme god of justice and divination. It was said that from his high vantage, he could see everything that happened on earth during the day, making him the ultimate judge of all conduct. And the king who ruled from Sippar, Enmendurana, is one of the most fascinating figures on the entire list. He reigned for 21,000 years. But it is not the length of his reign that makes him famous. It is the story of his fate. Later Mesopotamian texts claim something extraordinary. They say that Enmendurana was summoned by the gods Utu and Adad themselves to heaven. There, he was seated on a throne. He was taught the secrets of the universe, the science of divination, how to observe oil on water, and how to read the livers of sacrificial animals to foretell the future. He was essentially initiated into the divine council, and then sent back to Earth to establish the priesthood that carried this knowledge. His story is a direct parallel, and predates by thousands of years the far more famous biblical figure of Enoch. The book of Genesis says, "Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more, because God took him." Like Enoch, Enmendurana did not die. He ascended. This story represents the most direct link between the earthly kings and their heavenly patrons. It is a literal narrative of knowledge transfer. The secrets of the cosmos were not painstakingly discovered. They were revealed from on high. For ancient astronaut theorists, the story of Enmendurana is a smoking gun. Was this being taken to heaven a spiritual metaphor, or a physical event? Was he taken aboard a craft, transported to an orbital station, educated in advanced science, and then returned as a prophet king? Were the secrets he was taught, astronomy, mathematics, and methods of prediction, a simplified version of advanced technology and probabilistic science, translated into ritual forms a primitive culture could understand and preserve? His 21,000-year reign in the city of the sun god then became the long era in which this celestial knowledge was disseminated, laying the groundwork for the priestly and scientific traditions that would dominate Mesopotamia for millennia, a great age of enlightenment, gifted from the stars. But this world's time was running out. The final chapter of the pre-flood epic was about to take place in its fifth and final capital, a city named Shuruppak, and its king, Ubaratutu, would be the father of the only man chosen to survive the apocalypse. The final chapter of the pre-flood world did not take place in the glare of the forge or celestial enlightenment. It took place in the fifth and final capital, Shuruppak. The king who ruled there was Ubaratutu. His reign, according to the Prism, is listed as 18,600 years. This number, for the first time, is a break. It is the shortest reign of all the pre-flood kings, significantly shorter than his predecessors. It is as if time itself was accelerating, hurtling toward an inevitable, catastrophic conclusion. The shortening of his reign is not an administrative detail. It is a dramatic foreshadowing of the end. Like the other kings, the King List is silent on his exploits or decrees. But Ubaratutu's significance is immense, not for what he did, but for who he was. He was the last king of the old world. He was the one who presided over the final years of a grand cycle. His legacy is not found in the works he built, but in his famous son. While the King List does not name this son, other sacred texts, like the great epic of Gilgamesh, identify Ubaratutu as the father of Utnapishtim. And Utnapishtim was the man who would become the Sumerian Noah. The story, strangely familiar, begins in the heavens. The gods, tired of the noise and chaos of the humanity they had created, held a council. And Enlil, the god of storms and wind, the stern commander, made a ruthless decision to utterly destroy mankind, to wipe the board clean, to start over, his chosen instrument, a great flood that would submerge the entire world. But one god disagreed. Enki, the very god who had helped create humanity, who had given them civilization in his city of Eridu. He was bound by an oath not to interfere, but he could not stand by and watch his creation be annihilated. In a subversive act of defiance, Enki went to Shuruppak. He did not speak directly to Utnapishtim, as that would break his oath. Instead, he whispered to the reed wall of the hut where Utnapishtim slept. "O man of Shuruppak, son of Ubaratutu," he whispered, "dismantle your house. Build a large ship, a strange ship shaped like a perfect cube. Despise possessions and seek life." The instructions were specific. Load onto it your family and the seed of all living things. And so the reign of Ubaratutu became the final, terrifying calm before the storm. He was the king who presided over the last years of a civilization that had existed, according to the King List, for nearly 250,000 years. He ruled over a world living on borrowed time, completely unaware that humanity's countdown clock had hit zero. While the last king issued edicts, his son was building the only instrument of salvation. And then, the 18,600-year reign of Ubaratutu ended. This time, no new king was appointed. No new capital was chosen. the list of impossibly long-lived kings, the rulers from time immemorial, stops abruptly. The age of the gods on earth, the age of 10,000-year reigns, was over. Ubaratutu's son, Utnapishtim, sealed his ship. The sky began to collapse. The Sumerian King List ends its first great chapter with a single, brief, and terrifying sentence, closing an era. Then, the flood swept over. The pre-flood world was gone beneath the water. Nearly 250,000 years of recorded history, reigned over by 8 immortal kings, had been erased. Only a single ship remained, carrying the legacy of Ubaratutu, carrying the seed of our world, drifting on an endless ocean, waiting for dry land to appear again. Then the flood swept over. With just that one simple, almost cruelly dispassionate sentence, the Sumerian King List closed an entire era of existence. After meticulously recording 241,200 years of history across 8 kings, the ancient scribe used only a few words to describe the event that reset the world. There is no poetic description of the rising waters, no theological explanation for the god's wrath. It is presented as a cold, hard fact, a boundary line drawn straight through time. On one side of that line, an almost unimaginable age of kings with godlike lifespans, ruling for tens of thousands of years. On the other, a world submerged in water, and the dawn of a new, lesser age for humanity. This event, the Great Flood, is not just a Sumerian story. It is arguably humanity's most persistent and universal myth. It appears with astonishingly similar details in hundreds of cultures spanning the entire globe, even among peoples who could not have had any contact with one another. In Mesopotamia, it is etched into the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the survivor Utnapishtim describes an apocalyptic deluge, a storm so violent that the gods themselves cowered in fear like dogs at the force they had unleashed. In the Bible, Noah is commanded by God to build a massive ark, a refuge to survive the wrath of the waters that would cover even the highest mountains. In ancient Greece, Deucalion and his wife, Pyrrha, were the only survivors of a flood sent by an angry Zeus by floating to safety in a wooden chest. And in India, Manu Vaivasvata was warned by the god Vishnu, in the form of a small fish, of a coming flood, and built a great ship to save himself, carrying the seeds of life. These stories echo from the Aztecs in Mexico to the Aboriginal tribes in Australia, from Norse mythology in Scandinavia to the legends of indigenous peoples in North and South America. All tell the same core truth: a time when the world was submerged by water and a chosen few survived to repopulate the earth. For a long time, historians dismissed this. They argued it was just a simple flood myth, a common allegory for early civilizations that lived by great rivers and feared their destructive power. But the global prevalence of the story, the eerie similarity of the details, suggests something deeper. Could this be a shared memory for all of humanity? A psychological scar passed down through the millennia, a memory of a real planet-altering cataclysm? The geological record provides a stunning answer: yes. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, a mysterious period known as the Younger Dryas began. The Earth, which had been in a process of gradual warming, was suddenly plunged back into near-glacial conditions. The cause of this sudden and brutal climate shift is the subject of intense scientific debate. But one of the leading theories, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, posits it was triggered by the impact of one or more comet fragments into the North American ice sheet. The unimaginable heat from the impacts would have instantly vaporized vast amounts of ice, while simultaneously destabilizing the entire ice sheet, causing a catastrophic meltwater pulse into the world's oceans. The result would have been a rapid sea level rise on a global scale, mile-high mega tsunamis, and coastal flooding that would have wiped out any civilization living near the shore. Archaeology provides another piece of the puzzle. Excavations in southern Iraq, at the site of the ancient city of Shuruppak, the last pre-flood capital listed in the King List, unearthed a thick, uniform layer of river silt. This layer of mud, nearly 10 feet, 3 meters deep in some places, was dated to around 2900 BC. This flood layer clearly separates the earlier strata of the city from the later ones. The city was clearly hit by a devastating flood that completely interrupted its history. Although this Shuruppak event was a regional river flood, its terrifying memory may have merged with the older, deeper, and more global memory of the younger Dryas catastrophe to create the epic flood myth we know today. However, the Sumerian King List treats the flood as more than just a natural disaster. It was a fundamental turning point in the nature of reality. Before the flood, the kings were, for all intents and purposes, immortal. After the flood, they became human. The lifespans recorded on the prism shrink dramatically, from tens of thousands of years down to a few centuries, and then to the familiar lifespans of today. It is as if the flood washed away not just the cities, but also a specific kind of biological or spiritual longevity. The Bible mirrors this exact idea. Before the flood, patriarchs like Methuselah lived for nearly a millennium. After the flood, God explicitly shortens the human lifespan, declaring in Genesis, "His days shall be 120 years." Both traditions record a divine nerfing, a deliberate change to humanity. So, was the flood an accident of nature, or was it a tool, a deliberate act by the gods? From the perspective of the Anunnaki theory, the flood takes on an even more sinister and intentional character. It was not an accident of nature that the gods, or extraterrestrial beings, simply allowed to happen. Nor was it a moral punishment for human sin. It was a tool, a controlled demolition. Some theorists propose that the Anunnaki themselves triggered the cataclysm, perhaps by using advanced technology we cannot comprehend to destabilize the polar ice caps, causing the mass melting and sea level rise, an event that perfectly matches the geological evidence of the younger Dryas cataclysm. In this version of the story, humanity, their creation, had become too unruly, too independent. Or perhaps the hybridization experiment had produced unintended results. The population had exploded and order had collapsed. The flood was a reset button, a way to effectively wipe the board, eliminate the majority of the global population, and start over with a carefully selected, more manageable group of survivors. This interpretation frames the flood not as an act of God, but as an act of industrial-scale genocide, masked as a natural disaster. The story of the god Enki, who secretly warned Utnapishtim, or the biblical Noah, is then seen in a completely new light. It was not an act of divine mercy, it was an act of rebellion. Enki, the master scientist who had helped create humanity, acted against the decision of the council, perhaps that of his more ruthless brother Enlil, to save his beloved creation. He covertly preserved a genetic sample. Survivors like Utnapishtim were not just lucky, they were chosen. They were the curated genetic stock to rebuild the world, and perhaps they were rebuilt with new limitations hardwired in. The global nerfing of lifespans, recorded in both the Sumerian King List and the Bible, now takes on a purposeful meaning. It was a genetic patch, an adjustment made to humanity 2.0 to ensure they would never live long enough, never accumulate enough knowledge to challenge their creators again. The gift of immortality was permanently revoked. Regardless of its exact cause, be it a comet, an act of God, or a deliberate Anunnaki policy, the Great Flood stands as the great filter of human history. It is the firewall that separates us from our true past. It separates myth from verifiable records. It separates the gods from men. And it separates an age of unimaginable longevity from our own brief mortal existence. It is the scar on our collective psyche, a dim, dreamlike memory of a time when the world we knew was completely and permanently erased by water. When the waters finally receded, they left behind a scoured world, a silent world, a blank slate upon which a new history would be written. The world was new, but it was also diminished. The direct, physical link to the heavens seemed to have been severed. The gods had withdrawn, returning to the sky, or perhaps to another dimension, leaving humanity to fend for itself. For the first time, humanity was on its own, and a new generation of kings, human kings, would lead them out of the mud of a reborn world. The Sumerian King List marks this new beginning with the same dispassionate procedural tone it used to describe the end. After the flood had swept over and kingship had descended from heaven once again, the kingship was in Kish. The age of godlike kings was over. The new era belonged to men. The reigns listed now are significantly shorter. They are more believable, but still astonishingly long. The first post-flood dynasty at the city of Kish features kings who rule for 960, 840, or 300 years. Still impossible numbers by our standards, but a pale shadow of the tens of thousands of year reigns from before the flood, and as the list moves forward in time, the numbers continue to shrink until they become perfectly plausible historical reigns. It is in this new, more solid reality that we meet a figure who will become the most important bridge between the two worlds, and a king named Gilgamesh. It is in this new, more solid reality that we meet the most important figure on the entire prism, Gilgamesh, the fifth king of the first dynasty of Uruk. The King List records his reign with its usual procedural brevity, the divine Gilgamesh. His father was a phantom. His reign was 126 years. This number, 126 years, sits right on the fragile borderline between myth and possibility. It is too long for a modern human, but it is a plausible, almost humble number compared to the 28,800-year reign of Alulim before the flood. But unlike the silent phantoms of the pre-flood age, Gilgamesh explodes out of the cuneiform and into history as a fully formed character. He is the hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first great work of literature, a tragic epic poem that predates Homer's Iliad by at least 1,500 years. His story, painstakingly pieced together from fragments of clay tablets, tells of a powerful, arrogant king, a figure described as 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, a demigod who ruled his city of Uruk with an iron fist. To humble him, the gods created a wild man, Enkidu, who was born from the clay of the wilderness. Enkidu became his rival, and then his closest friend, his soul brother. Together, they embarked on heroic adventures, slaying the monster Humbaba who guarded the cedar forest and defying the gods themselves. But when the gods condemned Enkidu to death as punishment for their hubris, Gilgamesh, the mighty demigod, was completely shattered by grief. And for the first time, he was forced to confront the new reality of the post-flood world, his own mortality. This is where his story becomes a crucial bridge, connecting the two halves of the Sumerian King List. Terrified by the prospect of death, haunted by the loss of his friend, Gilgamesh embarked on a desperate quest for immortality. he resolved to find the only man said to have escaped the fate of mortals, Utnapishtim, the great survivor of the flood. After a long and perilous journey to the ends of the earth, crossing the waters of death, he found the ancient sage who had lived from the time before. Utnapishtim then tells Gilgamesh the entire story of the flood from a first-person perspective. He tells of the god's terrible decision, the secret warning from the god Enki, the building of the great ship, the terrifying storm that lasted 6 days and 6 nights, the landing on Mount Nisir, and finally, the gift of eternal life he and his wife were given. In that moment, Gilgamesh is listening to a living, direct link to the world before the flood. The story confirms that the events described by the King List were understood by the Mesopotamians not as myth, but as a real event in their history. Utnapishtim was the living proof. But when Gilgamesh begs for the secret of eternal life, Utnapishtim tells him the harsh truth. That gift was a one-time deal, an exception that would never be repeated. The age of immortality was over. The gods had decreed that for humankind, death was the final destiny. In this single, profound moment, the epic confirms the great reset described by the King List. The bridge to the past was still there, but the door was permanently closed. Gilgamesh, despite being 2/3 divine, was locked in the new mortal reality. He ultimately fails in his quest and returns to his city of Uruk, having learned the bitter lesson that the only true immortality a king could now hope for was to be found in the great deeds and lasting works he left behind. For a long time, scholars believed Gilgamesh was a purely mythological figure, like Hercules or King Arthur. But then archaeology began to catch up with the myth. In the 19th and 20th centuries, excavators uncovered the vast ruins of the ancient city of Uruk. They found the massive city walls, just as the epic had described them. And more importantly, they found other historical inscriptions naming kings from Gilgamesh's own dynasty listed on the prism. The name Gilgamesh itself appeared in other contemporary texts as a real historical king. He was not a myth. He was a memory, a real ruler whose life and deeds were so extraordinary that they became the foundation for centuries of legend. This is what makes Gilgamesh the linchpin of the entire Sumerian King List. He is the anchor that moors the seemingly fantastical first half of the document to the verifiable reality of the second half. Because Gilgamesh is real, it forces us to take the entire list more seriously. The scribe who recorded Gilgamesh's 126-year reign is the same one who recorded Alulim's 28,800-year reign. To the author, both were equally historical. Gilgamesh's demigod nature, 2/3 divine, 1/3 human, also serves as a tantalizing clue. Was this a poetic description of his great power, or a literal memory of Anunnaki heritage? He could be the end product of the hybridization program, a descendant of divine bloodlines that had been diluted over time. His quest for immortality was not just a metaphor for the human condition. It was a literal attempt to reclaim his ancestral inheritance, the longevity that was lost in the flood. His failure marks the final tragic end of that connection. After Gilgamesh, the divine spark seems to fade. He stands on the shore between history and myth, 1 foot in the world of the gods and 1 in the world of men. His story, of a lost age of divine longevity and a world-altering flood, would be astonishing enough if it only existed in Sumer. But it is not unique. What if this same historical framework appeared as a persistent echo in the foundational texts of every other major civilization on Earth? The story etched in the Sumerian King List of a lost age of impossibly long-lived rulers brought to an abrupt end by a world-altering flood would be astonishing enough if it were an isolated story. But it is not. The same core narrative framework, a golden age of divine longevity, a great aquatic catastrophe followed by a new era of shortened human lifespans, appears as a persistent echo in the foundational texts of almost every other major civilization. It is as if the core components of this Sumerian memory were smuggled out of the flood on different ships, preserved in the oral traditions of scattered survivor groups, and eventually written down in different languages and in different lands. The most striking and famous parallel is found in the opening chapters of the Hebrew Bible's Book of Genesis. The Bible's list of patriarchs, from Adam to Noah, reads like a direct, though condensed echo of the Sumerian pre-flood kings. Adam is said to have lived 930 years. His son Seth lived 912 years. And the list continues for 10 generations, culminating in Methuselah, who reached the age of 969. Although these lifespans are measured in centuries, rather than the Sumerian millennia, the underlying principle is identical. Before the flood, humans lived for extraordinarily long periods. The Bible even has its own Enoch, a man who walked with God and was taken directly to heaven without dying, a story that perfectly mirrors the Sumerian king Enmendarana, who also ascended. Then, exactly as in the Sumerian record, the flood arrives and acts as the great dividing line. After Noah and the ark, lifespans begin to steadily decline. Abraham lives 175 years. Moses lives 120 years. And by the time of King David, the human lifespan is just 70 or 80 years. The narrative arc is precisely the same: a lost golden age, an aquatic cataclysm, and a new, diminished world. Scholars often assume the Hebrew authors, during their exile in Babylon, simply borrowed and adapted the Mesopotamian myths, but the similarity may be deeper than literary theft. What if both the Sumerian and Hebrew texts were drawing from a much older common source memory? The echo doesn't stop in the Middle East. In ancient Egypt, the historian Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BC, compiled a history of his country's dynasties. Like the Sumerian King List, his work began with a lost primordial age. He listed a series of divine beings, gods and demigods, who had ruled Egypt for a combined total of thousands of years before the first mortal pharaoh, Menes, unified the country. The famous Turin King papyrus, from the time of Ramesses the Great, confirms this tradition, beginning its list of rulers with the dynasties of gods who reigned for vast mythic periods. The pattern repeats with almost monotonous regularity across the globe. In ancient India, Hindu cosmology describes a cycle of 4 yugas, or ages. The first and most perfect age, the Satya Yuga, was a golden era where humans were said to be gigantic, powerful, and live for 100,000 years. As each successive yuga unfolds, humanity's lifespan, virtue, and physical stature decline, leading to our current, degraded age, the Kali Yuga. In ancient China, legends speak of a series of divine emperors who ruled at the dawn of time, bringing the gifts of civilization and living for hundreds of years. What are we to make of this stunning global consensus? Is it simply a universal human tendency to romanticize the past, to invent a golden age that never was? Or is it a genuine, deep-seated memory, a piece of historical data that has been preserved in the amber of myth? If it is a memory, then the Sumerian King List is simply the most detailed and bureaucratic version of it that has survived. It suggests that the pre-flood civilization it describes was not a local Mesopotamian phenomenon, but a global one. Kingship descended from heaven may have been a planetary system of governance. The flood, in this context, becomes an event that shattered a connected world, throwing the survivors into a dark age. In their isolation, Each group preserved the memory of the before time in their own unique way, but the core elements remained the same. This theory provides a radical new lens through which to view ancient myths. They are not just fantasy stories. They are corrupted data files, fragmented historical records of a lost chapter in human history. The Greek gods, the Hindu devas, the biblical Elohim, and the Sumerian Anunnaki could all be different names for the same group of powerful, long-lived beings who managed the planet before the Great Reset. The Sumerian King List, with its dry mathematical precision, may be the closest thing we have to the original, uncorrupted master file of that forgotten age. It is the historical spine upon which the myths of the world were built. The list is just the skeleton. But if this skeleton is real, it means there must have been a body. There must be physical proof, structures that Stone Age humans could not have built, technologies out of place in history. Is it possible their legacy wasn't just written on clay, but was also carved into the very bedrock of the planet? The Sumerian King List. A modest clay tablet, hardened by 4 millennia of time, lies dormant in a museum. But on its surface is a challenge irreconcilable with everything we think we know about the past. It presents us with a set of facts, a list of kings and their reigns that is fundamentally impossible to harmonize with the human understanding of history. Mainstream scholars have tried to explain it. They tell us that the impossibly long reigns, those lasting 28,800 years, or 43,200 years, are merely symbolic. They assert that the entire pre-flood section, with 8 kings ruling for a total of 241,200 years, is pure myth. But these explanations begin to feel empty, unsatisfying. They are explanations designed to dismiss the evidence rather than engage with it. They collapse under the weight of the data itself, the absolute mathematical precision of the numbers, and the strange parallels of this story with flood myths and divine kings across the globe. To truly confront this mystery, we need a fearless theory, one that accepts the document at its word. In the 1970s, a rogue scholar, a courageous outsider named Zecharia Sitchin, did exactly that. He didn't just propose an explanation. He proposed a complete cosmology, a sweeping, spectacular theory that reframed the entire history of humankind. For Sitchin, the King List was not a myth. It was a history, a heavily redacted corporate history, recording an extraterrestrial intervention on planet Earth. Sitchin was a rare scholar, fluent in ancient Sumerian and other complex Semitic languages. Reading the original cuneiform texts, he claimed to have found a story that all other translators had missed, or perhaps had deliberately ignored. The key, he said, lay in a misunderstood celestial body. The Sumerians, we know, were master astronomers. They recognized the sun, the moon, and the planets out to Saturn. But Sitchin claimed their texts spoke of one more planet, a giant, undiscovered 12th member of our solar system, if you count the sun and moon. The Sumerians called it Nibiru, planet of the crossing. According to Sitchin's translations, Nibiru's orbit was not like the other planets. It did not travel in a stable, predictable circle. Instead, it hurtled on a vast elliptical path, like a giant comet, an orbit that brought it crossing through our inner solar system only once every 3,600 Earth years, before flinging it back into the cold darkness of deep space. That number, 3,600 years, was Sitchin's Rosetta Stone. It was not a random number. It was a perfect, stunning match for a central Sumerian unit of time, a unit called the SAR. And the SAR, Sitchin realized, was the exact unit used to calculate the impossibly long reigns of the pre-flood kings. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The numbers on the king list were no longer nonsensical. A reign of 28,800 years was not 28,800 Earth years. It was 8 Saudi riyals. A reign of 43,200 years was 12 Saudi riyals. The ancient scribes weren't using a human calendar. They were using the calendar of the gods. The beings who ruled Earth before the flood, Sitchin argued, were not human. They were the inhabitants of Nibiru. They were the Anunnaki, a term he translated chillingly, literally as, those who from heaven to earth came. But why did they come? What was their purpose on this remote planet, and why did they stay so long? Sitchin's answer was even more stunning than their existence. They did not come to explore. They did not come to conquer. According to Zechariah Sitchin's analysis, they came out of desperation. It was a mission of survival. Their home planet Nibiru was dying. Its fragile atmosphere was eroding, torn apart by its repeated trips through deep space. Their scientists, in a desperate bid to save their civilization, had devised a massive geoengineering solution. They needed to suspend fine pulverized gold particles in their upper stratosphere, a glittering gold shield to insulate the planet, patch the atmosphere, and reflect harsh sunlight. There was only one problem. Nibiru was poor in gold, but their astronomers knew of a place, a blue and white jewel on their long orbital path, a planet awash in the precious metal they needed. They called it Ki. We call it Earth. So, Sitchin claimed, around 450,000 years ago, the Anunnaki launched a colonial expedition to Earth. They arrived not as gods, but as miners. They established their first base, their command headquarters, in the fertile Mesopotamian basin. They called it Edin, home of the righteous ones, a name that echoes through the ages, preserved for us as the Garden of Eden. This was Eridu, the first city in the King List, where kingship descended from heaven. And from here, they began the work, a grueling, millennia-long process of extracting Earth's gold. This, Sitchin argued, explains the cryptic shift in the King List, when kingship moved from the sacred command center of Eridu to the industrial hub of Bad Tabira. The name Bad Tabira literally translates as Fortress of the Metalworkers. The list wasn't just recording kings. It was recording the phases of a planet-scale mining operation. But the work was brutal. The lower-ranking Anunnaki, the foot soldiers of the mission, toiled for thousands of years in deep mines, perhaps in southern Africa. Eventually, they could take no more. They mutinied. They refused to work, burned their tools, and besieged their commanders. Project Earth was in crisis. And it was at this moment that Sitchin made his most shocking and controversial claim. The Anunnaki leaders, specifically the brilliant scientist and genetic engineer named Enki, along with his half-sister Ninhursag, proposed a solution. They would no longer do the work themselves. They would create a Lulu Amelu, a primitive worker, a slave race, engineered specifically to take on the burden of mining. They didn't create life from scratch. They took a more efficient route. They took the best genetic material already available on the planet. The most advanced primate roaming the plains, Homo erectus. In their lab, Enki and Ninhursag performed a feat of biotechnology. They took the ovum of a native primate and upgraded it. They spliced their own DNA, the DNA of the Anunnaki, into the hominid genome. Through what appears to be a process of in vitro fertilization, they implanted the genetically altered embryo into a surrogate Anunnaki mother. After much trial and error, they succeeded. A new being was born, the first Homo sapiens. They called their creation the Adamu, the Earthling, the first Adam. In this cold and disturbing view, we are not the pinnacle of random evolution. We are a product. We were bioengineered to be slaves. With this radical reframing, the entire Sumerian King List changes meaning. It is no longer a mythological text. It becomes an administrative record, a cold ledger of this long-term colonial project. The 8 pre-flood kings, Alalim, Alalgar, and the rest, were the Anunnaki commanders in charge of Earth mission, their reigns measured in the long years of their home planet, Nibiru. Kingship descended from heaven was not a metaphor for divine grace. It was a literal memory of their spacecraft arriving and their command structure being established. But this history had a catastrophic turn, a foreknown disaster, a recurring event recorded in the memory of nearly every culture on Earth: the Great Flood. For Sitchin, this was not an act of divine punishment. It was a natural but predictable catastrophe, a disaster that occurred every time Nibiru passed through the inner solar system. Its immense gravitational pull periodically destabilized the Antarctic ice sheet, causing it to slip into the ocean and create a globe-sweeping tsunami. The Anunnaki leader, a stern figure named Enlil, saw the coming flood as an opportunity, a chance to wipe out their unruly, noisy human creations and close down Project Earth. But Enki, the scientist who had made us, had grown fond of his creation. He disobeyed orders. He secretly sought out a loyal hybrid of his, a man named Utnapishtim, the model for the biblical Noah, and gave him the plans to build a vessel that could survive the ocean's fury. The flood hit, and the world dissolved into chaos. When the waters receded, most of the Anunnaki had left, returned to their planet. They left behind a shattered Earth and an infant human race to pick up the pieces. But they didn't leave us completely alone. They left a structure, kingship. They passed rulership to their own descendants, the Anunnaki human hybrid bloodlines. The post-flood kings like Gilgamesh, who was described in the epic as 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. Sitchin's theory, whether right or wrong, is undeniably powerful. It takes all the disparate puzzle pieces of the past, the impossible numbers in the King List, the sudden explosion of Sumerian civilization, the global flood myth, the stories in Genesis, and fits them into a single coherent picture. It turns myth into misunderstood high-tech history. It tells us the gods were real. They were flesh and blood. And their legacy is written not just on clay tablets, but in our very DNA. If this is true even in part, then their legacy wouldn't just be in ancient texts. It would have to be all around us. It would have to be inside us. Could traces of an ancient non-human lineage still be flowing in our own veins today? If the Sumerian King List is not a myth but a memory, a distorted but real memory of divine kings or alien governors, then its legacy cannot be confined to ancient clay tablets. A project of such enormous scale, spanning 250,000 years and culminating in the genetic engineering of our own species, must have left traces. These traces might not be stone monuments or obvious technologies. They might be more subtle, more intimate. They might be hidden in our very biology, our society, and our deepest beliefs. The most provocative and personal of these potential legacies is the idea that the divinity of kings was not a metaphor. It was a biological reality, one that might still flow, diluted, in our own veins. Consider the persistent, cross-cultural concept of the royal bloodline. For thousands of years, ruling families across the world, from the pharaohs of Egypt, the emperors of Japan, to the monarchies of Europe, have justified their power. They claimed not just a divine right to rule, but a special lineage. They insisted that they were genealogically different from commoners. They were descendants of the gods. We often dismiss the term blue blood for nobility, assuming it just refers to their pale skin, which made their veins appear bluer. But some alternative researchers propose an older and much more literal origin. They point to ancient Mesopotamian and Vedic texts that describe the blood of the gods as being a different color. This connects to the idea that their blood was not iron-based like ours, which turns red when oxidized, but copper-based. Copper-based blood, found in creatures like the horseshoe crab, is blue when oxidized. Could the blue blood myth be a faint, distorted memory of a time when our rulers were truly biologically different, carrying the genetic legacy of the Anunnaki? This leads us to strange anomalies in modern human genetics. One of the most famous is the Rh-negative Rh blood type. About 15% of the world's population lacks the rhesus factor, a protein found in the red blood cells of the other 85%. Bizarrely, the Rh-negative factor seems to offer no clear evolutionary advantage. Worse, it can cause severe immune complications during pregnancy, if an Rh-negative mother carries an Rh-positive child. Some fringe theories propose this is not a random mutation at all. They suggest it is a leftover genetic marker from an ancient, non-human lineage. Proponents point to a fascinating fact. The world's highest concentration of Rh-negative blood is found in the Basque people of Spain and France. This is a mysterious people whose unique, non-Indo-European language and distinct genetic profile set them apart. Could they be the descendants of a purer, less diluted line of Anunnaki human hybrids? Beyond our blood, the legacy might be imprinted on our society itself. The King List claims kingship was the first institution, the foundational gift from the gods. This top-down structure, a single powerful ruler and a hierarchical society below, became the default model for nearly every civilization for the next 5,000 years. Is this the most natural way for humans to organize themselves? Or is it simply the system we were given, the only one we knew? Perhaps our entire multi-millennial history of monarchies, empires, and dictatorships is just a direct inheritance of the Anunnaki command structure. Modern conspiracy theories push this idea even further. They suggest the Anunnaki never truly left. They simply shifted from overt, physical rule to covert, shadow rule. These theories propose that a network of elite bloodline families descended from the original Anunnaki human hybrids has been secretly controlling world events for centuries through their influence in finance, government, and media. They are managing their human resources, steering our development toward their own long-term agenda. Finally, the legacy may be spiritual. The King List describes an age when the divine was a physical, ruling presence on earth. The flood severed that direct connection. It left humanity with a profound sense of abandonment, a phantom limb pain for what was lost. Could this be the origin of religion itself? Is our species' universal yearning for God, for a connection to a higher power, not a psychological trait, but a deep ancestral memory of a time when we weren't alone? Are our prayers and rituals an unconscious attempt to reopen the lines of communication that were cut when the gods left? The legacy of the Anunnaki, if real, is not something we observe in a museum. It is inside us and all around us. It is the ghost in our machine. And as we look back at that clay tablet, we no longer see just a list of kings. We see a mirror reflecting ourselves, forcing us to confront the ultimate question: what, after all, are we? We have journeyed from a dusty clay prism to the edge of the solar system, from the dawn of civilization to our own DNA code. We are left now standing before the Sumerian King List, an object that is simultaneously an undeniable historical record and an impossible fantasy. It is a document that balances the verifiable reality of King Gilgamesh with the incomprehensible reign of King Alulim. After analyzing the text, the context, its echoes in global myth, and the radical theories it has inspired, we must face the final, unavoidable question. What is this thing? Is it a record of gods, a history of men, or something else entirely? There is no easy answer, only a series of profound and perhaps disturbing possibilities. The first possibility is the conventional one, accepted by mainstream history. In this view, the King List is a political document. It was likely compiled around 2100 BC by a Sumerian king who wanted to legitimize his own rule. He did this by creating a single, unbroken royal succession stretching back to the beginning of time. The pre-flood kings and their impossibly long reigns were not meant to be taken literally. They were mythological archetypes, symbols of a divine order that the current king claimed to inherit. The numbers, 28,800, 43,200, were not years. They were symbolic figures, representing power and cosmic completeness, based on the sophisticated Sumerian base 60 mathematical system. The flood was simply a literary device, a mythological reset to separate the hazy, sacred past from the more concrete political present. This explanation is neat. It's rational, and it requires no challenge to our current model of history. But it is also deeply unsatisfying. It feels more like a dismissal than an explanation. It doesn't adequately explain why the numbers are so mathematically precise. It doesn't explain why the list transitions seamlessly from myth to history with no change in tone. And most importantly, it doesn't explain why this basic narrative pattern, divine kings, long ages, a destructive flood, appears in so many other unrelated cultures across the planet. The second possibility is that the King List is a misunderstood history. It records real events and real rulers, but the ancient scribes, and in turn we, have misinterpreted the data. Perhaps the pre-flood kings were not individuals, but dynasties. The name Alulim might not refer to a single man, but to a ruling house or clan that held power for 28,800 years. Another variation is that the years are not years as we know them. Perhaps they are months or seasons. But when you apply this math, the reigns become too short to be meaningful, and it breaks the elegant and deliberate pattern of the SAR, the 3,600-year cycle. This path seems to create more problems than it solves. And then, there is the third possibility, the most radical one, championed by Sitchin and others. This is the idea that the King List should be taken literally. It is an accurate, if brief, historical record of a time when Earth was under the direct administration of a non-human, technologically and biologically superior species, the Anunnaki. Their lifespans, measured in thousands of years, were normal for them. Kingship descending from heaven was their colonial government. The creation of humanity was their solution to a labor shortage. And the flood was a planetary-scale event, either natural or engineered, that marked a major turning point in their project. In this view, the prism is perhaps the single most important artifact ever discovered, a direct, written account of ancient contact. It tells us that we are not alone, and we never have been. In the end, the Sumerian King List functions as a kind of cosmic Rorschach test. What you see in its cuneiform wedges reflects your own beliefs about the nature of the past and the limits of possibility. The prism itself remains silent. It offers no final answer. It simply presents its data and challenges us to make sense of it. Perhaps the true legacy of the Anunnaki and their 241,200-year reign is not a secret bloodline or a hidden history. Perhaps the true legacy is a question. a question that has been baked into a piece of clay for 4,000 years. That question is, are you sure you know the whole story? It challenges us to admit the possibility that our modern, scientific understanding of the past is incomplete. It whispers that there were ages before our age, worlds before our world, and that the line between God and man, between myth and history, is far blurrier than we are comfortable admitting. The 8 kings, Alulim, Alalgar, and the rest, may be gone, their cities buried under the dust of millennia. But their story, their impossible, defiant, world-shaking story, remains. It survived the flood. It survived the fall of empires. And it has survived to be read by us today. The Sumerian King List is not just an artifact. It is a key that opens a hidden door in the hallway of history. Behind that door is a world that defies our expectations. A world where time moves differently, where kings were more than human, and where the origin of our civilization is tied to a gift from the heavens. The clay prism offers no easy answers. Instead, it leaves us with a profound and unsettling legacy of questions. It forces us to reconsider the very foundations of our history and ask if the myths we dismiss as fantasy might be the most important historical records we possess. The mystery of the Sumerian kings endures, a silent, 4,000-year-old challenge to everything we think we know, about who we are and where we came from. In the silence of the night, when the world sinks into sleep, our minds often drift to faraway lands, realms of memory obscured by time. And no place evokes that eternal, powerful mystery more than the land of the pharaohs, ancient Egypt. Just hearing those 2 words, our imagination is immediately lit. We see sparkling golden rivers under the sun, magnificent towering temples, and zoomorphic gods reigning over a world of magic and glory. Cinema, with its unparalleled power, has etched these images into the public consciousness. Films of cursed tombs, rising mummies, and treasures beyond imagination. They are wonderful tales, but they are also just the surface of a deep ocean of mystery. Because rising above all myth, there is a truth of stone, towering and unshakable, that has existed for millennia. Let us go to the Giza plateau. Imagine you are standing there right now. The sky is a deep blue, cloudless dome. Beneath your feet is sand, stretching to infinity, hot under the blazing sun. And before you, they rise. 3 giant, man-made mountains, an image so familiar it is almost unreal. The pyramids, they are the witnesses of history. They have seen empires rise and fall. They watched Alexander the Great march past, listened to the promises of Caesar, and silently observed the armies of Napoleon. They are the only intact surviving wonder of the ancient world. Millions of people have stood where you are standing, gazing at them and asking the same question. How? How could a civilization, with only rudimentary bronze and stone tools, quarry, transport, and lift stone blocks weighing tens of tons, hundreds of feet into the air, with a precision that even our modern laser technology would struggle to replicate? We focus all our attention on these 3 great pyramids, the Pyramid of Khufu, or the Great Pyramid, the largest and oldest, the Pyramid of Khafra, with its remaining smooth limestone casing at the peak, and the Pyramid of Menkaure, the smallest but no less exquisite. Our minds try to grasp their scale, but it is difficult. They are not just tombs. They are time machines, messages sent from a lost world. But what if I told you that what we see is only part of the story? What if the truth of Giza is far more complex than what the history books tell? In reality, Spread across the sandy deserts of Egypt, there are not just 3, but as many as 118 large and small pyramids that have existed and still exist. Many of them have been eroded by time, becoming anonymous piles of rubble forgotten by dust. Our attention, our awe, is focused on the 3 structures at Giza, and there is a good reason for that. They are not just great in size. They also hide a secret of the stars. Researchers, using astronomical models, have discovered an astonishing truth. The 3 main pyramids on the ground, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, align perfectly, but not in a straight line on the ground. They are a reflection on the ground of the 3 brightest stars in the constellation Orion, specifically Orion's belt. An almost impossible coincidence. A great celestial map carved in stone, as if the pharaohs wanted to say, as above, so below. This astronomical arrangement has baffled Egyptologists for decades. It implies a level of knowledge, a grand purpose that we still cannot fully understand. But it is right here, amidst the known, that an even greater mystery begins to take shape. In ancient texts, in the forgotten records of the first explorers, there exist whispers of a 4th structure. Another structure aligned with the 3 main pyramids, a pyramid not made from the sandy yellow limestone we are familiar with. It was called the Black Pyramid, an ominous name, a structure that has vanished from history. In fact, today, very few people on this planet know of it. It does not appear in the tours. It is not mentioned in the documentaries. So, if it truly existed, where has it been throughout the flow of history? Was it swallowed by the desert, buried by sand from human understanding? Or was it deliberately hidden? And if the 3 pyramids we know are a mirror of Orion's belt, then this 4th pyramid, what star did it represent? The story of the Black Pyramid is not an ancient myth passed down orally over thousands of years. It is a specific historical mystery, recorded not on papyrus but on white paper, in black ink, by an incredibly reliable man. His name was Frederick Louis Norden. To understand the weight of this testimony, we must travel back in time, not to the age of the pharaohs, but to the mid-18th century, an age of discovery, when Europe was yearning to fill the blank spaces on the world map. Norden was a Danish naval captain and explorer. He was not a dreamer or a treasure hunter. He was a true prodigy. Imagine, at only 14 years old, he was admitted to the Royal Danish Naval Academy. He was a soldier, an engineer, and most importantly, a genius cartographer. In the age before photography, when technology was rudimentary, the ability to faithfully reproduce what one saw with drawings was an invaluable skill. It was the only way to transmit knowledge of foreign lands back home, and Norden was blessed with that gift. His outstanding talent caught the attention of King Christian VI, and in 1737, the king gave the young Norden a monumental task: to lead an expedition along the Nile River, exploring the mysterious lands from Ethiopia, through Egypt, all the way to Sudan. Norden would be the king's official representative, his mission to observe, to record, and to reproduce everything he saw, the people, the monuments, the architecture, everything. Norden's expedition arrived in Egypt in June 1737, but their journey was not smooth sailing. As they moved south, the weather suddenly turned harsh. Their ship ran into trouble. They were stranded. But it was this very misfortune, this unintended delay, that turned out to be a stroke of luck for history. Stranded in Egypt, Norden had something most other explorers did not: time. He didn't just pass through. He stayed. He observed. He measured. And he drew. He spent a long time surveying the Giza plateau, meticulously recording every detail with the sharp eye of a naval engineer. When Norden returned to Europe in 1738, he brought back a treasure. Not gold, but astonishingly detailed maps and sketches. His records of Egypt were something completely new, far beyond any European understanding at the time. His discoveries were later published in a monumental book titled Travels in Egypt and Nubia, Voyage d'Égypte et de Nubie. This book caused a stir across the continent. But hidden deep in those pages, specifically on page 120, there is a passage that has puzzled researchers for nearly 3 centuries. Norden described what he saw at Giza. He wrote, and I quote, "The principal pyramids are to the east and southeast of Giza. There are 4 of them, and they deserve the greatest attention of the curious. The 2 northern pyramids are the largest. The other 2 are much smaller in height, but have some other distinct features that make one examine and admire them." Let's pause for a moment. 4. He wrote 4 principal pyramids. He was not mistaken. He even described this mysterious 4th pyramid thoroughly. He dedicated his admiration to describing it in detail. He wrote that it has no outer coating, and it is closed just like the other pyramids. But here is the key detail. Norden described its material. He said this 4th pyramid was made of a black stone and harder than common granite. And he also specified its location, standing apart from the others, further to the west. This was not a vague note. This was the testimony of a professional witness, an expert cartographer and military engineer whose job was to record the truth accurately. Immediately, controversy erupted. Modern scholars who only see 3 pyramids rushed to dismiss it. They said Norden must have been mistaken. They argued he had mistaken one of the secondary monuments, the small satellite pyramids, the tombs of the queens, for a 4th main pyramid. But that hypothesis has a serious flaw. Norden had described precisely that the 4th pyramid was made of black stone harder than granite. Meanwhile, all the satellite pyramids at Giza are made of light yellow sandstone or limestone. A person might be mistaken about size from a distance, but an engineer, an amateur geologist like Norden, could not mistake the basic building material. Yellow limestone and black granite are 2 completely different things. Furthermore, Norden himself affirmed that he saw 7 or 8 other pyramids in this area, referring to the satellite pyramids, but they were nothing compared to the 4 main ones. He had made a clear distinction. He counted 4 great structures and many other small ones. Norden's testimony is a contradiction that cannot be ignored. It challenges the consensus of history. And then, as researchers dug deeper, they discovered something astonishing. Frederick Louis Norden was not the only one. Even before Norden, another explorer, a French friar named François de Pavie, Marquis de Brève, also visited Giza at the end of the 16th century. And in his notes, he also described 4 main pyramids on this plateau. How could 2 explorers, separated by more than a century, with no connection to each other, both make the same silly mistake about a structure that supposedly never existed? Or perhaps they saw something that today we can no longer see. The question hangs in the air, as heavy as the granite blocks themselves. How could a great structure, a 4th main pyramid, simply evaporate from the Giza plateau? We are talking about a structure of black stone, harder than granite, large enough for a royal explorer to notice and admire. It's not a needle, it's a man-made mountain, and yet, today, not a trace remains. There are 2 possibilities, both terrifying in their own way. The first possibility, and perhaps the most logical, is destruction by human hands. Look at the map. The Giza Plateau is right next to Cairo. one of the greatest and oldest cities in the world. For centuries, Cairo has grown, expanded, been built, destroyed, and then rebuilt. All of that construction required a massive source of building materials. And for the medieval builders, the pyramids were not historical wonders. They were the most convenient open-air quarries. It is painful to imagine, but it is very possible that around the beginning of the 18th century, right after Norden's time, the Black Pyramid suffered the same fate as the splendid white limestone casing of the Great Pyramid. It was dismantled, block by precious black block dragged away, to build the city walls, the mosques, and the palaces of a rising Cairo. If this hypothesis is correct, then the Black Pyramid did not disappear. It was simply recycled, dissolved into the fabric of a modern metropolis, erased from history. But there is another possibility, one that whispers of the eternal power of nature. That is the desert. We often think of the desert as a static, empty place, but that is a mistake. The desert is an ocean of sand. It is always moving. The dunes shift like giant waves in the slow waltz of time. They devour. It is very possible that the ruins of the fourth pyramid are still lying out there somewhere, not completely destroyed, but merely buried under a thick, patient layer of sand over the centuries, hidden from the curious eyes of man. For centuries, this was just speculation. Archaeologists tried to search, but they had almost nothing to go on. One problem that stalled the decoding journey was that there were too few documents about it. Besides the scattered notes of Norden and a few others, this mysterious pyramid seemed not to exist on paper. Searching for it was like fumbling in the dark. And then, everything changed. Humanity entered the 21st century. For the first time in history, we acquired the eyes of the gods. Satellite technology. From orbit thousands of miles away, sophisticated machines began to scan the Earth's surface. They didn't just take pictures. They used ground-penetrating radar. They used infrared imaging, which could detect subtle changes in temperature and material density deep beneath the surface. Machines had replaced humans, reaching places where no shovel could hope to excavate. And Egypt, once again, stunned the entire world. Just in the first decade of the 21st century, this technology proved that the desert was still hiding its secrets, and by the end of 2020, an extraordinary discovery was announced. 300 miles south of Cairo, near Luxor, archaeologists began excavating an area that satellites had marked as having potential. What they found made them gasp. As the thick layers of sand were brushed away, it wasn't fragments. It was intact mud brick walls, bricks stacked on top of each other, running long, forming rooms, corridors. Just a short time later, the shape of a large city gradually emerged. This was not a small village. This was a massive administrative and industrial settlement, built by one of the greatest pharaohs, Amenhotep III, the father of Akhenaten. They found countless everyday items, exquisite pottery, abandoned jewelry. It was dubbed the Lost Golden City. It had lain there, incredibly intact, buried by dust and forgotten for 3,500 years. The discovery of this city was irrefutable proof. It proved that a large part of the truth about ancient Egypt is still buried right beneath our feet. If an entire city, the largest of its time, could be swallowed by the desert and erased from memory, then what is a single pyramid? The search for the Black Pyramid suddenly no longer seemed far-fetched. But when scientists aimed their technological eyes at another questionable site, about 50 miles from Cairo, they didn't find a pyramid. They found what the ancient Greek historian Herodotus had once described. Something considered a myth, a massive underground labyrinth. time has a strange way of eroding the truth. Old stories are gradually forgotten, and true stories, through thousands of years of oral transmission, gradually become vague myths. We have spoken of a forgotten pyramid. Now let's talk about a labyrinth, considered a myth. In the 5th century BC, the father of history, the Greek historian Herodotus, made the trip of a lifetime to Egypt. He stood before the pyramids just as we do and marveled. But there was something else that stunned him even more, something he described as surpassing all human works. He called it the labyrinth. In his records, Herodotus described it with utmost awe. He wrote, "The intricacy and complexity of the passages, from room to room, from courtyard to courtyard, was truly an endless wonder to me." He described a 2-story structure, one above ground and one underground, with 3,000 rooms. He said the walls were covered in sophisticated carvings, the courtyards paved with white marble surrounded by rows of columns. He declared that it surpassed even the pyramids. For thousands of years, Herodotus's words were flatly rejected. Scholars dismissed it as exaggeration, a Greek fairy tale. A massive labyrinth like that, with not a single trace left? Unrealistic. It could only exist in myth, until 2008. About 50 miles south of Cairo, in the Dasher Desert, a team of researchers used advanced ground-penetrating radar technology to scan an area that Herodotus had specified. What the radar screen displayed made them hold their breath. Deep beneath the sand, the presence of massive, complex artificial structures appeared. Thick walls, rooms, corridors. All of it matched Herodotus's description frighteningly well. The greatest labyrinth of ancient Egypt seemed to have been found. And some researchers began to wonder, could this be what remains of the mysterious Black Pyramid? But this is where the story takes a strange turn. As soon as this shocking discovery was preliminarily announced, a wall of silence descended. For a reason that was never clearly explained, the Egyptian authorities banned the widespread publication of these findings. The large-scale excavation was forced to stop. Everything gradually faded into oblivion. The question remains, painfully, if the clue to a great labyrinth, a discovery that could rewrite history, had been found, why was it not investigated further? What effect could an unexplored archaeological site have on a nation's security? Or perhaps it hides an even more formidable truth, a truth that could completely change our understanding of this civilization, of their technology, of the true purpose of these structures? To this day, no one has provided an answer. And this brings us back to the most important detail that the Danish explorer Frederick Norden wrote. He didn't just see a 4th pyramid. He described its material, a black stone and harder than common granite. To us, black often evokes mourning. But in ancient Egyptian culture, black was the most sacred color. The original name for Egypt was Kemet, meaning the black land. It was not the color of the desert, but the color of the fertile black silt that the Nile bestowed each year. Black was the symbol of rebirth, of life sprouting from death. In mythology, black was the color of the underworld, the duat, where the sun passed through each night only to be reborn, brilliant and new, every morning. The hard black stone that Norden described, usually basalt or diorite, was the very stone used by the ancient Egyptians to make the most important artifacts, sarcophagi, statues of gods, and ritual items in tombs. So why would they build an entire pyramid out of this sacred and precious stone? Perhaps the answer lies not in architecture, but in philosophy. Could it be that the ancient Egyptians, with their deep understanding of time and eternity, were afraid? afraid that the pyramids of ordinary limestone would not withstand the erosion of the desert sun and wind. Did the Black Pyramid hold a special meaning, an irreplaceable purpose? Perhaps they built a special pyramid with the stone of rebirth, in the hope that this very structure, just like the sun, could be reborn. They hoped that, even if it were to disappear in the endless flow of time, destroyed by man or buried by sand, that at some point it would reappear, intact. Despite centuries of research, Egypt remains an unsolved mystery, and the fourth pyramid, whether scattered in the walls of Cairo or sleeping peacefully beneath the sealed labyrinth, continues to baffle us. It is a reminder that there are chapters of human history that have never truly been opened. Amidst the vast golden sands of Egypt, under the scorching sun and the thousand-star night sky, a question still echoes through the millennia. Is there yet another great pyramid, a mysterious Black Pyramid, waiting to be discovered on the Giza Plateau? We all know well one reality, that there are countless structures, tombs, and secrets of ancient Egypt still buried. Perhaps the remains of such a majestic structure are also lying dormant somewhere beneath our feet, waiting for a day when someone is lucky enough to stumble upon its glorious foundations. A discovery that could reveal to the world that ancient Egypt is still full of wonders, and the journey to discover its true history is far from over. To this day, experts have not found any trace of a fourth standard pyramid at Giza, but that does not mean it never existed. The supposed disappearance of the Black Pyramid is just one of the countless mysteries that humans are relentlessly seeking in this legendary land. Setting aside that curiosity for a moment, let us face an even bigger question. What was the true purpose that drove the ancients to create such colossal structures beyond our imagination? Regardless of how much time and effort it cost, they were still erected. According to the traditional view, the answer lies in their conception of death. In ancient Egyptian culture, death was not the end. Death for them was the beginning of an eternal life beside the gods. They believed that, as long as the physical body existed, one day the human soul would be reborn. And perhaps the first and most obvious purpose of the pyramid was as a machine for immortality, a place to store and protect the bodies of the pharaohs, awaiting the day of their resurrection. The pyramids of the Old or Middle Kingdoms were all superstructures of royal tombs. The solidity and massiveness of the structure served a single purpose: to protect the king's remains from tomb robbers and the ravages of time. But the choice of the pyramid shape was not random at all. It contained incredibly profound symbolism. The pyramid is an apex structure with a square base and 4 side faces that are equilateral triangles. This shape symbolizes the primordial mound, the first mound of earth that rose from the chaotic waters at the dawn of creation. Their outer surface, in their golden age, was cased in white Tura limestone, polished to a magnificent sheen, reflecting the sunlight like a giant jewel. The names of the pyramids themselves also often related to sunlight. The Egyptians believed that the dark region in the night sky, around which all the stars seemed to revolve, was the physical gateway to heaven. And astonishingly, one of the narrow, mysterious shafts, originating from the main burial chamber of the Great Pyramid, points directly toward the center of that dark region. This suggests that the pyramid may have been designed as a soul launcher. Its shape is interpreted as a solid ramp, launching the deceased pharaoh's soul straight up to the abode of the gods. Other theories suggest that the shape is a symbol of the sun's rays, solidified, like a ladder for the king to climb to the sky. Whatever the explanation, it is clear the Egyptians tried to build the tallest structure possible, a tangible bridge between the earth and the stars. The pyramid itself also did not stand alone. It was the center of a complex royal burial complex, including a mortuary temple on the west side and another temple located in the valley near the Nile River. Connecting the two temples was a high, built-up causeway stretching for hundreds of meters. The historian Herodotus, when visiting Giza in the 5th century BC, described that the walls of this causeway were decorated with exquisite relief carvings, making an impression no less powerful than the pyramid itself. The construction site was also carefully calculated. The Giza Plateau was chosen for its panoramic view overlooking the Nile Valley, and it is located on the west bank. In Egyptian culture, the west is where the sun sets, the land of darkness and the afterlife. More importantly, the white limestone bedrock here created a solid foundation, capable of withstanding the colossal weight of the structure for thousands of years. They had chosen the location. They had the grand purpose of eternity. But how? How could an ancient civilization with seemingly rudimentary tools be able to draft, level, and measure with such staggering precision that even modern technology must respect? Precision. That is the word that haunts anyone who studies Giza. Construction began with preliminary drafting and site leveling. They had to create a perfect base, an eternal foundation, using seemingly rudimentary tools, just square rulers and ropes. The ancient Egyptian craftsmen achieved a level of accuracy that modern laser machinery must be wary of. For example, the pavement of the walkway around the Great Pyramid of Khufu over such a vast area varies by a maximum of only 2 centimeters. They did not level the entire area. To save effort and create a solid core, they kept the natural rock in the center and only leveled the surrounding perimeter area, creating an absolutely flat foundation. When the site was ready, the surveyors began the most important job, laying out a perfect square corner for the base and orienting the entire structure to the 4 cardinal directions of the compass. Each pyramid was aligned with precision. The east or west side was aligned with true north by observing the movement of the stars on the horizon. Once again, their alignment was almost absolute. The sides of the Great Pyramid deviate from true north by an average of only 3 minutes of 1 degree, an error so small it is unbelievable. For many years, scientists have tried to decipher the layout plan, which appears offset diagonally of the 3 main pyramids. In reality, there seems to be no single master plan. The pyramids were built at different times as separate projects. The diagonal layout seems to be the direct result of a technical requirement. Because each pyramid had to be aligned to true north, they were built progressively further back toward the edge of the plateau. This was done so the later construction would not obstruct the view of the northern stars, which was the guide for aligning the previous structure. Next, the materials. The stone blocks used for the inner core of the Great Pyramid were quarried right on site, from a quarry located south of the structure. But the builders quickly realized that the white limestone at Giza was of too poor quality to be used as the outer casing layer. Therefore, hundreds of thousands of tons of smooth, pure white limestone had to be transported across the Nile River from Tura. And to make the critical structures, like the inner chambers or the giant plug blocks, they needed granite. This super hard stone was transported from Aswan, 935 kilometers south of Giza. On average, each stone block used to build the pyramid weighed about 2.5 tons. When they arrived at the port, the stone blocks were loaded onto giant wooden sleds and were pulled by hundreds of workers with ropes to the base of the structure. One such ancient transport route from the Middle Kingdom period has been excavated. Flat wooden beams were discovered placed on the roller path, lying on a layer of hard mud. Pouring water on the mud would significantly reduce friction, making transport more efficient, And who were the people who performed this extraordinary work? Contrary to what many people think, the pyramids were not built by slaves. They were created by a conscripted labor force. They were not forced, but were paid properly. Surrounding Giza was an entire huge supply workforce whose only task was to provide food, drinking water, and tools. Recent estimates suggest that the Great Pyramid used a permanent workforce of 20,000 to 30,000 people. One of the most controversial aspects is precisely how they got those 2.5-ton stone blocks, and even some 80-ton granite blocks, up to a height of hundreds of meters. Currently, most scholars agree that a complex system of ramps was used, perhaps a giant straight ramp or a spiral ramp running around the body of the pyramid. After the structure was complete, these ramps were dismantled. But the real mystery lies not just in lifting the stones, but in how they joined them together. How could ancient people fit the stone blocks so tightly that a razor blade could not slip through? Close-up shot of the precise joins between stones. Each stone was intricately shaped at its final location so that it fit perfectly with the adjacent stones. The final finishing work took place from the top down. As the workers moved down from the edges, the ramps were also gradually dismantled. The Great Pyramid of Gu, or Khufu, has a unique internal structure. It has up to 3 known chambers, with the King's Chamber, built entirely of Aswan granite. The ancient architects even devised an elaborate iron portcullis and granite plug mechanism to seal the corridors, blocking the greedy intentions of tomb robbers. All this information, from the astronomical positioning, material quarrying, transport techniques, to the massive labor force and astonishing precision, is enough to stun us. But it also gives rise to an extremely logical question. If building only for the normal purpose of burial, would ancient people have needed to spend tens of years, mobilize tens of thousands of people, and achieve a nearly impossible level of technical skill just to build a tomb? The answer perhaps is no. A structure containing such a phenomenal effort must surely have had another purpose, much greater than that. Quite a few scientists and independent researchers have proposed an extremely bold theory. The 3 main pyramids on the Giza plateau are not tombs. They are giant power plants. The first and most stunning reason against the tomb hypothesis, it is that, despite centuries of searching and digging, not a single pharaoh's mummy has ever been found in these 3 colossal structures. The idea of ancient electricity sounds fantastical. We still often assume that Edison and Tesla brought electricity into common use in the 20th century, but history may hide deeper secrets. In 1934, in Iraq, archaeologists discovered a strange ceramic jar. Inside it was a copper tube and an iron rod. When combined with a mild acidic solution, like vinegar or lemon juice, this artifact produces electrical energy. This Baghdad battery has been determined to be about 2,000 years old, perhaps even older. How did people at that time possess such advanced knowledge? Many mainstream scientists view this as just an accidental discovery, a curiosity and nothing more. But what if it wasn't an accident? What if it was the remnant of a lost technology? To understand the Giza power plant hypothesis, we must reimagine the original appearance of the pyramids. They were not originally the sandy yellow color we see today. The giant pyramids at Giza were once covered in a layer of white Tura limestone, polished to perfection. The multi-block structure, with its sharp square corners, turned each pyramid into a giant mirror, reflecting the brilliant, dazzling sunlight. Only after the great earthquake in 1303 did this perfect casing fall off, causing the pyramids to lose their original appearance. What we see today is, in fact, just the inner core. What was the purpose of this white casing? Just for insulation? to keep the mummy from getting too hot or too cold? That seems rather impractical for a structure of this scale. But deeper research into the material reveals an astonishing detail. The outer casing was made from Tura limestone, a special type of stone that does not contain magnesium. Today, this material is often used in laboratories and power plants because it has very good insulating properties. It plays an important role in preventing the electrical energy inside from being lost to the outside. Could the ancients' choice of this exact material just be a random coincidence? And then there is the precision of the stone blocks. They were fitted so tightly that a razor blade cannot slip through. Could this method of construction be precisely to prevent the escape of any form of energy being generated on the outside? But if the outside was a perfect insulating layer, the inside was designed completely the opposite. The interior surfaces of the pyramid, for example in the king's chamber, were made from granite, but the passages leading into it were lined with another type of limestone, called dolomite. This stone contains a small amount of metal crystals and quartz, two components famously important for optimizing the transmission of electrical energy. Next, let's look at the passages and tunnels, especially the mysterious ventilation shafts. They are made entirely of granite. Granite has a unique characteristic. It is slightly radioactive. This property actually ionized the air inside the pyramid, basically charging the air and significantly increasing its electrical conductivity. We have an outer insulating shell. We have an inner conductive core, and we have tunnels that turn the air into a conductive medium. Basically, the ancient Egyptians seem to have built a giant electrical cable. But a machine needs a power source. A power plant must have something to generate. If the pyramid was a machine, then its raw energy source, where was it drawn from? That energy source, according to this hypothesis, came from the Earth itself. The Giza pyramid complex was not just built on rock, it was built above underground, water-bearing limestone layers. Deep below, natural voids and caves hold a huge amount of water. And the great flow of the Nile River, as it passes through these underground rock cavities, has the ability to create a natural electrical current, a physical current, or also known as a telluric current. This was the raw energy source. The tunnels inside the pyramid, which were made of conductive granite, acted like conductors, charged by this very current from the ground. The entire special architecture of the pyramid seems to be designed to draw up the electromagnetic field formed from deep below, transmit it upwards, and amplify it. It is believed that, in the distant past, a device with very high conductivity, perhaps solid gold or a special alloy, was placed on the very top of the pyramid, where today there is only an empty space. This was the transmitter. From this tower's peak, energy was transmitted wirelessly to the obelisks or auxiliary structures built around, supplying power to various places. This hypothesis becomes even more convincing when a mysterious room, or more accurately a sealed-off shaft, hidden in the pyramid for thousands of years, was discovered in 1993. Archaeological evidence shows that it seems this area was deliberately hidden by the ancient architects. Not until 2011 was a sophisticated exploratory robot able to get a miniature camera to approach this area, passing the first door, and what appeared through the lens was a system of carefully crafted copper handles attached to a second door. On the floor of the shaft were mysterious symbols drawn in red paint, looking like a wiring diagram. Copper, the indispensable metal for creating and conducting electrical energy, from great power plants to the tiny battery in your watch. Even with the evidence present right before our eyes, many people still claim that all the materials making up the pyramid are just random coincidences. But the most interesting and astonishing thing is that this technology of creating electricity from the earth and transmitting it wirelessly seems to have been rediscovered by the genius scientist Nikola Tesla in the early 20th century. Tesla considered the earth to be one giant plate in a capacitor. The ionosphere in the atmosphere, hundreds of kilometers away from us, is the second plate. Recent scientific measurements indicate that the voltage difference between these two plates is about 400,000 volts, an endless source of energy surrounding all of us. Tesla dreamed of controlling and harnessing this great discharge, just like the desire to control the lightning bolts in a rainstorm. He wanted to provide free wireless energy to the entire planet. The final question remains unanswered, hovering in the still air of the Giza desert. Could the pharaohs somehow have touched this knowledge thousands of years ago? Could they have turned the entire Giza plateau into a machine, harnessing the boundless energy of the planet itself? And if so, that knowledge, where is it now?